So I guess this is where I do my idle chit-chat. But today I'm doing a little my idle chit-chat to wait for Brad to join me. So without further ado, let's just get the music started, and we'll see if we can have a proper show this evening. Anyway, welcome to the Annoying Peasant Radio Show.
And now for something completely different.
Humans do have an amazing capacity for believing what they choose.
I think before we go around killing people, we had better make dance here of our evidence.
They lied to you. It's time to learn the truth.
You can't handle the truth! From what was once an inarticulate mass of lifeless tissues, may I now present a cultured, sophisticated man about town.
Hey, welcome everybody to this episode of the Annoying Peasant Radio Show. My name is Tom, and I think I'll be hosting here with Brad shortly. I'm sure he's just a little behind schedule tonight. Anyway, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. I appreciate every single listener I ever get. So thanks again very much for joining me. This episode is entitled Bombs, Babies, and Cecil. Okay, I did that weird on purpose, so I might intrigue you into think about what the show could possibly be about. And hopefully you'll gain the context to understand what that is here as we move along. Anyway, just a quick reminder that the chat room is open. If you happen to be listening live tonight, let me get there so I can actually see it. Oh, yeah. There's Tanya. She's in there. Hey, Tanya, thanks for joining us tonight. Good to see that you're there. Hello to everybody in Hayward. Anyways, tonight we're going to... So anyway, please join the chat. Tanya's in there. There'll probably be a couple other people in there eventually, and we'll get the chat here with Brad as time rolls by. I just wanted to kind of the rundown of the show tonight. I'm going to just have a couple opening words. We're going to do some announcements, and then we're going to go on to a couple featured topics, which include the GOP debate from, I believe that was last week, Thursday, if memory serves. And then we'll talk about Cecil the Lion a little bit. I know Brad had some thoughts on that too, so when he joins us, he'll be able to chime in on that. So without that, I'm going to go... Without that, I said, with that, I'm going to go to my opening remarks. Usually I kind of do a deal on what the basic show, the whole show is really about. I'm going to forego that, and we'll talk a little bit more about specifics tonight. Just to change things up a little bit and see how people like them or if they don't. Anyway, a common criticism of a just society is presented when a person claims to have found the necessity for a law that supports justice. Of course, their version, right? They criticize, well, a free society can't possibly work because there needs to be a law for whatever is on the top of their mind, right? And if they don't see that, property rights will properly enforce that. They think there needs to be a law, and if you're talking to someone, they're saying, hey, we don't have that law in force right now. So, what are we going to do? Your society can't possibly work. And again, it's not my society, it's a free society, but that's how it's kind of in the argument form when you're talking to someone. That's how it's presented. But what I wanted to say, even in this society now, okay, I'm poking fun a little bit, but there are a lot of people say there ought to be a law, right? Well, does that mean that there's not a law in place for something that people think is a necessity, but they don't happen to abandon the system of positive law that we have now because that law, again, whatever it is they're thinking, doesn't exist, right? They don't go, the whole thing has to just collapse, chaos, it's the end of the world because that law doesn't exist. But of course, when arguing for a free society, and I say, well, laws could certainly develop as well, Well, they say, well, if you don't have it in place, it just can't work. So, I wanted to go back and talk about a little bit. The country was founded in 1776. When I say the country, United States, of course, depending on where you're all listening from. But think about it. In 1776, the country was founded, the United States was founded, but the Constitution wasn't even ratified, and therefore maybe, again, I'm using slang, but the law of the land until about I believe it was 89, if I have my dates right. If you want to argue about the dates, go right ahead. I'll accept the date you want, but I know it's not 1776. It was after that, to be sure. But again, so I have to ask the question, how could a society have survived, right? There was no constitution in force in the United States, right? It just seems like that it doesn't remotely become a deal breaker for people. But if you propose a free society and they seem to find, and again, in a lot of cases, they're not finding a hole, but they think they found a hole, right? So that's why they say, well, the whole idea of a free society is condemnable. But, how is it possible, again, that people survived in such a situation between, say, 1776 and 1789? Wouldn't there be chaos? Because that's what I'm constantly accused of, that I want to just promote chaos. Wouldn't dogs be sleeping with cats? It would be the end of the world, And, of course, the most famous question, what about the roads, right? That one always tips everybody in the ditch. But think about it today, if you look back and go, even, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 200 years ago, why were there no concerns over the laws governing drones? I get it. Drones, at some point weren't even contemplated or thought of, and you say, well, how could he have laws on something that wasn't even invented? But apparently it gives people uneasiness if they could even potentially envision a situation where they think property rights rooted in self-ownership won't apply, right? So they get all bent out of shape and they say, again, a free society couldn't possibly exist because of that. But what about the, banking laws back then, right? Back when the United States was established. All the banking laws weren't in place. So again, chaos would necessarily have to ensue. And again, people will argue with me and say, well, hey, people's fortunes were stolen because of lack of banking laws, because of lack, and it surely has happened. But hasn't there been theft, rape, and murder since a lot of these laws have been in place and up to date? I assume some theft, rape, and murder is actually going to happen today, but there's laws in place, right? So again, people misunderstand what a legal system is versus how people behave. And again, if I argue that, well, there likely be criminals, there will be crime in a free society, I would argue, again, there would be much less of it because much more stringent enforcement of laws, and I could explain that all on a later date. You can get into that. But they say, well, then it's not a perfect society, so why even trying to do that? Well, again, it's just a system of laws. It's not a way of perfecting the human animal. That's a different discussion or argument. But I just think it's interesting what is a deal breaker for people in a society that is proposed, or a way of organizing society, versus the current way that the same problem, and even in many cases to a more severe degree, exists. But that's not a deal breaker. So again, it's the inconsistency of thought is one of the many issues that comes forward. And then, I'm just going to mention just a little bit about Cecil the Lion, and I think Brad and I are going to talk about it more if he can join us here. But, it's actually kind of an interesting happening or event, and obviously not just the event, all the outrage and the thoughts and the commentary afterwards. But we're going to talk about the basic story, and then I think we're going to have a different view than what you've heard of, kind of in the vein of property rights. And to my knowledge, I really haven't heard anyone talk about that yet. So that might be interesting to hang on and listen to that discussion and a little back and forth there, and we'll see what happens there. just in closing of my opening points here or commentary, property rights is a topic that we, I say talk about frequently. Maybe we discuss continually on this show, and it's at the core of the notion of justice. So it's very difficult to discuss a free society, which is essentially a just society. Those terms to me are synonymous, without the knowledge of the principles of justice. And everyone needs to learn them and live their lives as consistently as they can. And that's the way to avoid conflict, which, again, will create a peaceful society, a just society, or a free society. Basically, again, I see those all as the same basic terms. So with this in mind, please listen closely to the upcoming discussion and our talking points here. Question me if, in the event you understand it, I have not been consistent, or you don't see how I've been consistent in promoting justice and peace. We're very interested in your questions and concerns, as we can learn from them ourselves as well. So for selfish interest, but also we would like to help people move along in this journey and learn more about the philosophy of freedom. And again, as Brad likes to say, our aim is here is to make you think. And if we can get you to just question the authority, question the system, wonder about it a little bit, I think that's a moral victory for sure, certain for us. So please, think about these things. I think there's a lot of interesting aspects and a lot of interesting topics that we touch on this show. And again, the idea is to maybe intrigue you a bit. So we had the quote of the day, and I think this is an interesting one, and I guess I'll tell you right off the bat. This is from Tom Woods, of course, one of my favorites. He's got a podcast at Tom Woods Show. I think TomWoods.com, if you're interested, to go there, and you can, subscribe to his feed, and you can get his podcast pushed to you. He does his 5 days a week, if I'm correct. But this one is a good one, again, because it hits right to the core of many objections to a free society. He says, "Who will build the roads is the question that belongs at the top of every libertarian drinking game. If we didn't have state coercion," the argument runs, "there would be no roads." He says, "There'd be a Sears store over there and your house over here, and everyone involved would just be standing there scratching their heads." And again, it's just to point out the absurdity of course, you couldn't do roads without the state and without the coercion that the state uses. And again, most people, I realize, don't consider that or even understand that the state, in fact, survives only by coercion. But I think it's very interesting how he puts it, right? Think about it. Do you think this is actually an insurmountable problem in a free society? Literally, like he says, if there's a place you needed to go and you were, of course, not there, you are, quote unquote, here, you really think in a free society, there just would be no means of transporting yourself. There'd be no way of getting there. That would just be an insurmountable problem, and, life would cease to exist because of that problem. Again, I think it's actually humorous, the way he looks at it and the way he's depicted it there. And I just ask people to think a little bit. It's just amazing how, obviously, it's their indoctrination. It's their, the tradition, the way things ought to be, the way things are, the way things have been, however they use it. And they're very uncomfortable with thinking a little, I guess, outside the box for an overused phrase. Anyway, let me move on to announcement. That was I saw that on a Facebook post, by the way, from Tom Woods, and again, enjoy his stuff very much. I'd encourage anyone to check his stuff out. AgoraFest, we're going to move on to announcements, by the way, sorry. AgoraFest 2015 at the Villa Maria Conference Center and Retreat. That's September 24th to the 27th. Of course, we'll save the date. We're looking at, getting close to a month away here now. And I did have some technical difficulties, and then I was traveling, and I'm actually still traveling, so I'm going to have to get my act together here. We'll have to get Nick back. We're going to get him, unfortunately, back very close to the show. We wanted to the AgoraFest, but we were hoping to get him on a little earlier, but again, I apologize. That was my fault a few weeks back. Again, as I say, I guess pretty much every time, watch the Facebook page. We do post a lot of good stuff on there. And when I say we do, of course, Tanya, Tim, Cassie, and Trigger do a lot of that stuff. They have some interesting stuff. I always like seeing their stuff because obviously it's different than what I happen to be into at the time. So it's very enlightening, and some of it is just downright funny. I think I put on one earlier about the Bernie Sanders campaign. I thought it was a little bit harsh, but I think or direct, but I think it's to the point. So I think hopefully you take a look at that and you might get a bit of a chuckle. And our next show will be live on Tuesday evening, August the 18th, if I have my dates right. I certainly hope I do, because August 11th is an important date in my household. It's my anniversary, so congratulations. Maybe I'm supposed to say best wishes to my wife. I don't know how to do that properly, but anyway, the August the 18th will be the next show at the same time, 7 p.m. Central. So please join us for that one. Of course, we'll accumulate some more topics and some more angles to look at things. Anyway, I was going to move on to the news here. One of the things last week, of course, we did the show last week, Tuesday, and if I remember right, 2 days later, being that Thursday, Jon Stewart, he broadcasted his last daily show. And I just wanted to make a couple comments, and I know, obviously, Jon Stewart is a very popular figure. The Daily Show is very popular. It's just interesting to me. You know, I'm critiqued many times because I'm seen as too critical. And when I say too critical, I'm very critical of the state, of course. So what I'm critical of is the use or the violation of people's property rights. I'm very critical of that, and I don't actually care who does it. It doesn't matter to me if it's the state or anybody else. The state happens to be, I think, by far and away the largest violator. So I think it would be dishonest of me to not come forward and talk about the, I guess what's the right phrase, the 2,000-pound gorilla in the room. So obviously I'm very critical of the state. But again, I abhor the violation of anyone's property rights by anyone. It's really irrelevant. It's the violation of property rights that I have a problem with. I don't necessarily have a problem, or those people should be subject to more or less sanction depending on who it is. It doesn't matter. So, you know, in the context of Jon Stewart, you know, I see him was highly critical, right? He would be ridiculing people continually because whether he thought they said something incoherent, inconsistent, inconsiderate, however, you know, he did that. But I think here's a guy, not only did he make apparently a fine living, he had wonderful statistics, right? He was very popular, became kind of a media sensation, right? But beyond, and that's all, by and large, that's, you know, the marketplace working. And of course, the populace, you know, a significant portion of it, liked his work. They tuned in and they supported him. And obviously, I don't have a problem. Even if I disagree with his views, it's in some degree irrelevant. But here's where, again, from a personal standpoint, not from a political philosophy standpoint, I happen not to have been a fan of The Daily Show. And many people, why, you just don't like Jon Stewart? You know, I don't even know. Was he? I think he was Jewish, if I remember. I don't know. You know, people will pick something out. You know, I didn't like the way he parted his hair, the way he spoke, whatever. That had nothing to do with it. Here's my problem. He had a giant audience. He had a talk show that centered essentially on criticism and ridicule, right? But the problem to me with Jon Stewart was not really those things. I don't have a problem with criticizing something that is unjust. I think it's wrong to not criticize something unjust, right? To just let an injustice pass, that's an injustice in my view. So that clearly is not this issue. I was just arguing that people claim that about me and I shouldn't critique things. But here's the real problem in my view. He didn't hold the principled position. He doesn't support freedom, right? He basically had this giant pulpit. He had a huge audience, and he chose not to promote something worthwhile. And actually, what he actually did is he promoted the reverse. by and large, he was, I don't know, maybe contemporarily you would call him progressive, a liberal. We can argue about exactly what category you want to put him in. But certainly he promoted more coercion through the state. And again, I can't get my hands around this, that he could have used this to promote freedom. And instead, in fact, he promoted statism. One of the other things, and again, not his fault, of course, but, many of the millennials apparently have been polled and found that Jon Stewart, to them, was a trusted newsman, right? That's where they actually got their news. And that's not his fault. I get that. But it's kind of a sign of the times, I guess, maybe I want to say. So very interesting. And obviously would have been so wonderful had he used that pulpit to promote freedom, a coherent message, and instead he chose to promote the opposite. So anyway, that's all I had really to say about Jon Stewart and what happened there. I just thought it was a little interesting. Again, there was last week, I think it was Wednesday, Thursday, I watched this the CBS Morning News and a couple other newscasts in the morning, and they were just heaping praise all over this guy, and that's partly what inspired me to include him in this week's show. Anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about the GOP debate. I thought that was interesting, but before I really get into that, Michael Hurd wrote another article, and I get quite a kick out of his stuff. I get it through Facebook, so I don't know. It's his name, Dr. Michael Hurd, Hurd is his last name. Again, if you get a chance, I recommend his stuff. He had a little something to say here, and I can't remember when he posted this. It's probably 3 to 5 days old. He basically says, history books will someday record that 2015 was the year Donald Trump called Megyn Kelly of Fox News a name, mean Donald Trump. I think that actually was the title of his article or his little posting there. In the meantime, Social Security, Medicare, and the rest of the federal government are going broke, right? I think obviously what he's pointing at is the things that the media and of course as a result, or maybe before that, which is the cart, which is the horse, that people focus on. Again, I would argue they don't focus, of course, on freedom and what a free society offers and justice. They many times don't even really focus on statism. They're focusing on the skirmish between two people that I would argue is a largely unimportant skirmish. So Dr. Hurd says, and I'm just going to list some of this stuff. He says, fact. Check this out. When saving the state as it is now in its financial distress, we'll call it. He says, fact. If the federal government confiscated every penny produced by the private economy for the next decade, think of that. If the government confiscated every penny produced by the private economy for the next decade, assuming a yearly average GDP of $20 trillion. Today it's about $17.4 trillion annually. In the 11th year, the aggregate national debt would still amount to trillions of dollars. So again, at least I hear from time to time people saying, the debt's just not an issue. We don't actually ever have to pay, quote unquote, ourselves back. Well, think of how deep that hole is. Of course, he says, if we confiscated every penny from the private sector, people would stop working. Nobody would want to make money if the government were going to take 100% of it away as soon as they earned it, right? So that's not only feasible, it's not even possible. So, we may have Brad joining us now. Let's see if we get him here. Mr. Ray, are you with us?
Oh, for God's sakes.
Well, hello to you too, sir.
How are you doing, Tom?
I am good. We're going through a couple things here, a story, but we're very happy that you're joining us.
I'm very sorry. I've changed my password with Skype about 18 times.
Oh, cool. So 18 is a charm, or is it 19 is a charm?
No, and then it went back, and my original one worked, so you figured it out.
That's nice, huh?
Yeah, very sorry, folks.
Oh, that's okay. That's quite all right. We're going here. You have the docket. Did you see that, Brad?
Yep, I do.
Okay, I'm down. I don't know if we're talking about from Dr. Michael Hurd. I'm in there a little bit, a couple things down. So again, he's talking about the confiscation of wealth. In fact, he says is where I'm at is in the 2014 tax year, the top 20% of earners paid 84% of individual federal income taxes. If that is not progressive or enough spreading the wealth around, then what would be? He asks. Fact, he says, for the first time, people who are retiring today will receive less in benefits than they paid into Social Security via payroll taxes. So think of that. You're going to deposit more money in Social Security via payroll taxes than you're going to receive. At the same time, right, your life expectancy is going up, right? So you'll be receiving these benefits for longer years. But he says you still will. He says, isn't this fraud? And there's a reason I have this included here, and we'll get to that in a second. But isn't this fraud? Isn't this cause for concern, if not outrage? Isn't this cause for at least considering deserting the Democratic Party instead of flocking to it as young people do? And I think he asks a valid question. I think a lot of people don't ask themselves that question, even if they, affirm where they are. What's really the big deal? Just ask yourself the question and contemplate it. I don't think it's a big deal. But he says so far the most pressing issue in the presidential campaign is whether Donald Trump meant to insult some moronic, his words, moronic Fox News anchor when he talked about her metaphorical bleeding. Of course, he's talking about Megyn Kelly of Fox News. So anyway, I'm going to move on to the GOP debate. But before we do that, I have to first tell you, everybody, you're listening to the Annoying Peasant Radio Show. And I just wanted, of course, now I'm going to do my idle chit-chat with Brad, since he just joined us recently. So, how's it been going? You're a little frazzled, I take it.
Oh, gosh, it's just frustrating. Passwords, login ins, software upgrades, all fun.
Oh, yes, all good times. How you been? I haven't even got to really talk to you over the last, whatever it's been, 2-3 weeks.
How the heck are you, dude?
I am doing just fine. You're surviving the summer all right?
Yep, you've been a traveling guy, right?
I have been, and I will be, and that's another story I need to chat with you about. But
all right.
I guess no moss is growing under my feet for the moment.
Well, so happy anniversary to you and the missus.
I thank you. Appreciate that. I happened to mention that early on because I said I have to because I'll get in trouble. And, of course, I also need to congratulate Lisa for putting up with me. So quite a feat.
So, I'm going to take the high road on that.
That boy. I mean, that's one of the many things I like about you, Brad.
There you go.
Hey, did you happen to see any of that GOP debate?
I saw so many clips that I think I've seen it all. But I didn't watch it live, but I saw lots and lots and lots of clips.
I had to ask you that question because, many times I think on the show, we've gone back and forth, and I say, hey, I don't pay attention to politics. I really don't care about politics. It's political philosophy that interests me. But I had to watch it just strictly for entertainment value.
You can do that?
Yeah, I could. I mean, I thought it was very entertaining. I thought it was funny. The stuff that people get their undies in a bundle about.
Yep.
Was just it's just humorous to me. It's like, you got to be kidding me. That's actually the problem. If that is in fact the problem, we got no problems.
Yep. Well, there is that.
Yeah. I was going to mention something else, and now it's escaped me for the moment. But I just saw. What did I see? I saw a thing, and this is one of them I'm contemplating for our next T-shirt. If I remember right, it's like politics, the entertainment division of the warfare state. I thought that was quite cute and accurate. Obviously, that's why I thought it was so good. But and to me, that's what it is. It is just an entertainment division. It's quite interesting to see how, again, from my view, from the perspective of freedom, how these guys are missing the ball. And, of course, to win the popularity contest, you have to miss freedom. Really, I don't think you can stand up there and say the things that you and I say on this show and win the popularity contest.
Well, in my opinion, I don't think there's a chance in the world that he'll be the Republican nominee.
You're speaking of Donald Trump?
But I think that that's one of the highly entertaining things about him right now, is that he's not one that is pandering to anybody. He's loose cannon, if you will.
Yep.
Seems to be speaking his mind, right, wrong, or indifferent.
Yep.
And seems to be, without handlers that are saying, oh, you can't say that because it'll offend those guys. You can't say that because it'll offend those guys.
Right.
Whatever. That part's fun to watch.
It's very entertaining. And it's also interesting even to think about, and it's not a big deal. We're just kind of having fun here for a moment. Is Trump saying these things because he's got such a strong personality, and he in fact does have handlers that are kind of trying to work on him, and he just can't be reined in? Because is that just his personality, right? I just have the personality that can't be reined in.
Well, I think he's proven that a little bit over the years.
Yes, I think so. I mean, I don't think it's an act. I just think that is the way, in fact, he operates, and what you see is what you get there, and if you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. Right.
And he's got his own big sandbox, and he doesn't have to worry about who's going to come play in it.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit about what he had to say. Very little, really, of substance, that I think should interest people, other than the fact that they're all statists and are all going to say, we're going to take your money and we're going to do this stuff. And obviously they're not going to emphasize, we're going to take your money. They're going to tell you what they're going to do with it. And that usually sounds good to people. They kind of skip over hey, we got to take your money first. But, that's just, I guess in today's world, it's kind of a given. But I just thought it was interesting at the very onset of the thing. And actually, I can't remember. I was actually watching Fox News, and then they were doing some discussion amongst the three questioners, I don't even know, moderators, I guess is the right word. I'm not sure what they call themselves. But, they did say, hey, remember, this is not I can't remember if this is before they reset and restarted for the top of the hour for the actual debate, or if it was prior to that or after that, but they said, hey, this is not a popularity contest. Remember, these people are running for president. I'm like, well, of course it's a popularity contest. That is, in fact, if you win by popular vote, it's a popularity contest. So I just thought that was funny. They try to put it in this real professional light. Well, it's a popularity contest.
Absolutely it is.
Yeah, and we've talked about this many times, that, hey, if the handlers say you do this and you'll get more votes, by and large, they do it. Again, Trump is the exception. That's why we're talking about him tonight. But
and in my opinion, many a nominee of recent memory have pandered to the one way or the other because they thought it was going to benefit them and lost.
Yeah, it didn't work out. If you got shitty handlers, that doesn't work out for you.
Right.
So I just thought that was funny. But so the deal, the popularity contest, I was like, yes, of course it's a popularity contest. But then the first question I thought was interesting, and then probably people have seen that a number of times, who's here tonight not prepared to pledge support to the eventual nominee? And, of course, that probably was. And obviously, do I know what was in the hearts and minds of those moderators? Absolutely not. But that probably was pointed right at Donald Trump. I mean, he's the only one who's kind of been saying, he's apparently said a few times, hey, if things don't work out, they don't treat me with respect at the GOP, I may do this as an independent. And, of course, so he was the man who raised his hand and said, yeah, I'm not prepared to. But this is all I wanted to say on that. It was interesting. Every guy there should have. It's like saying, well, here's the deal. Here's the roulette. We don't know who the nominee is going to be. Are you going to just blindly support him? Well, what if you have serious disagreements with him? You're just going to sit there and pledge to everybody that you'll just support him no matter what because he has, an R after his name? And with that, I think what Trump did was in line with reasonableness. And I know it was disappointing. I believe that crowd that was there in Cleveland was, the Republican Party of Ohio, blah, blah. I'm not describing anything, but that's essentially what they were. They were all Republicans, obviously. So they want a Republican to win. But I think it is a crazy notion to just, for me to sit here and say, hey, I want a Republican to win. And then somebody say, well, does it matter who it is? Nope. That seems crazy. So I think what he did there was completely reasonable, but of course it wasn't received as such, and that's why I thought that was kind of interesting. And the other thing I will give him, since he was the only one, and he did look around at his, competitors, if that's the right word, and nobody was raising their hand, and after he recognized nobody raised their hand, he was the only one who had courage to do so. So I give him credit for that. Again, as you said, Brad, right, wrong, or indifferent, I give him credit for having the courage. He's on a national stage. I think there's argument that was the largest audience ever, television audience, for that time. I don't know if it's a presidential debate or just a GOP debate, but it's a huge audience. And here's a guy, he's willing to stand up and say something that I think he knew was going to be controversial. So I don't know if you had anything on that, Brad, or not.
Well, I think to what you just said, did he do it only to be controversial? Then I think any of their actions, any of their comments are suspect.
Yes. I mean, they're trying to garner votes.
Yes.
That's the bottom line there. So that's an interesting point. Maybe he did it to do that. But even to do that, it does take some, gravitas, if it is for the Democratic talking points word, to do that anyway, I think. So a bit of kudos there for him. One of the things I like about Trump is he's basically giving it to the establishment. And I know if you happen to be a strong R person, you're big on the Republicans, you maybe don't like it. If you're a Democrat, you might be loving this stuff because you're thinking, yeah, Trump's going to suck if he has to go against Hillary. So this is great. Just beat up the Republicans. But, I mean, I think he's right, and most of what he says, that's not the right thing to say, but I just like him giving him a little bit of H. I guess that's the thing that kind of trips my trigger.
Sure.
So anyway, sticking with the Trump, the flap over the name-calling with the women and Megyn Kelly, that whole thing really was about what? Right? Trump, as we have just kind of said, is apparently a very successful businessman, and depending on how you define success. The point is he's got a lot of money, okay? But, throughout his career, he's not known, I think, to be the most gentlemanly guy. He's not known for those kind of things. He's known for, hey, he just does whatever it takes so that, I don't know if this is, again, the right description, but wins on a deal. And to some degree, if he berates somebody, so what? He wants to win on a deal. I mean, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying we all know that that's what Trump is. So now all of a sudden it's a big flap, when he says, hey, you called some women whatever, stupid, fat, whatever. I can't remember all the adjectives Megyn Kelly used. But, so what's the flap really about? Trump should have said, yeah, of course, I'm like a lot of people. Or I'm not saying this as an advisor to him. My reaction, and again, I had time to think about it. Maybe he didn't. But, the point is I'd say, yeah, I've said a lot of words I regretted. I think a lot of people have. And if you want me to tell you I regret some of those words, I certainly do. Some of them I probably might stick by. But, he could have left it by that. I love how he deflected with the humor and said, only Rosie O'Donnell. He said first. So, of course, here I'm watching the thing for entertainment value, and I'm already laughing. And it was like really the first real question of the show. So, anyway, and I think she right away when he said only Rosie O'Donnell, she said no, there was more, and then his comment kind of behind the scenes, he said, "Yeah, I'm sure there is more." And I just thought that was funny,
right?
But and again, what's the point? Is he saying? Is the point of the question say, do you have the temperament to be president? I guess I'm assuming that was the point, and I think. He could have just said, yeah, I have the temperament to be president. And again, I've got time since the question was asked. He didn't. So I'm not criticizing him, per se. I just think some of this isn't as big a deal as people are making. I mean, apparently that's the biggest deal out of the whole debate deal. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. That's the problem? Because we're going to talk about a few more things coming up here. But the other thing that Trump said that I thought was interesting, he said that he had given money to a large number of candidates, and I think he said, I don't know if he said all, but at least it was a significant number of other guys standing on the stage with him. And he went further, though. Not only did he say that he handed him money, he said, he, of course, did so in his capacity as a businessman. That was all before he became a candidate. Again, it wouldn't make too much sense for him to give his competitors money into their campaign coffers. But he says, that's how you get things done. He says he gives the money and he gets what he wants. And he says that's how he knows the system is broken. Of course, he didn't really propose anything to change that part of the broken system. But I think that, in a sense, you could argue that was incredibly stupid to say. On the other hand, maybe was it? Again, I don't know his motivation. Was it just incredibly honest? And again, I read a thing today. I'm like, what? Yeah, here it is. This. Do you know where the polls are today? I believe this is Iowa. Yes, it's Iowa's latest polls. I think it was today. And this is from, I think it's called Public Policy Polling. The Iowa poll. So Trump makes these comments, and that was kind of the end of all I had to say, basically, of Trump. So, a lot of people were, Trump's going to take a dive now because he did go too far, right? Here's the deal. In Iowa, Trump's at 19%. Ben Carson is at 12% with Scott Walker. Jeb Bush is at 11%. Carly Fiorina is at 10%. 9% for Ted Cruz, 6% for Mike Huckabee, and Marco Rubio. And there's obviously the others. But so I think he was at like 20% nationally before the debate, and I don't know if this reflects a national poll. I realize this is an Iowa poll, but I don't know if it's consistent throughout the nation. But hey, basically he's at 20%. I don't know what the margin of error is, but it's got to be more than 1%. So, maybe his handlers, they're making an argument. It didn't hurt us a bit. Keep going. So it's kind of interesting, the whole Trump thing, and I find that very entertaining. There was a couple things, though, that I did think were interesting a little bit more substantively. And again, I don't know, Brad, if you saw this. No, I don't have an audio clip of this. I have one of a later one. The Social Security flap between Chris Christie and Mike Huckabee. Do you happen to recall that one, or? I
heard some peripheral commentary about it, but okay. I didn't see it word for word.
The deal was, the basic deal, and I don't know who was originally asked the question. I can't recall that, but obviously check it out on YouTube. But it was between Chris Christie and Mike Huckabee, and the deal was, if I remember right, Chris Christie was claiming that he would, to save, quote-unquote, Social Security, he would phase in the raising of the eligibility age. Right, and I don't know if he was saying he was going to. I know they were talking about. I can't remember, what did they say? If you had income of like $400,000 or $500,000 in retirement, and you had $5 million in liquid assets, then they would probably get you to. That would be the threshold that if you were there or above, you wouldn't be entitled to Social Security at all. Right, that was the thought. So that was Chris Christie. He said that's just reality. That's what we need to do to make this work going forward. And again, this relates to what I'd said from Dr. Michael Hurd earlier about Social Security, that was the point, to relate these two items. But then Huckabee says, hey, wait a minute, this was a promise to the citizens, right? And they paid into that system, and they shouldn't suffer the consequences of poor decision-making, right? It wasn't their fault. I'm using the air quotes there. And again, I don't call it poor decision-making, me, personally. I call it theft, but that's a bit of a side issue. And so he's saying, no, the payers deserve their money, so the federal government has to pony up and pay that money. But again, if that money has been spent, how could the federal government pony up and pay that money? I mean, there's only a couple ways, or three ways, I guess, to be succinct. They can borrow it from another country or somewhere else from other banks, and then it's going to have to get paid back by one of the two next means. It's either going to be through increased taxation, right? You have to put more money in those coffers for them to pay it out, or they're going to have to print more money, which means they're just going to devalue the money that you own. So ultimately, the citizenry is going to pay, period. There's just no way around that, right? But Huckabee is like, no, we made a promise to those people, so we're going to live up to the promise. But that's interesting. I think, if I remember, Huckabee might have used the word stealing and lying and stuff. Well, what's interesting is Christie says it's unrealistic, what Huckabee's proposing, basically to not modify the program to make it go on, say, hey, we have to hold these promises. Why? Because Christie says that the lying and the stealing has already occurred, right? But if you think about it, he says, hey, we had a system of Social Security that was subject to lying and stealing. We just need to modify it a little bit so it lasts longer. He didn't say, hey, the lying and stealing has to stop. The incentives in place to create the lying and stealing, I guess I'm cool with just leave them in place, according to Christie, right? So he's saying, let's modify the program and just trust us going forward. And you know, I'm dumbfounded by that. I'm like, you got to be kidding. And I realize people will, and maybe in very large numbers, but I just, you know, I was kind of put back in my chair. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. The thieves who stole the money are now to be trusted with the money. You know, and I think probably Chris Christie came across as the more realistic person in that little exchange. And again, that's just my take on what other people's takes would be. So take it for what it's worth. But I don't know if you had any thoughts on that, Brad, or if that.
I think that it's interesting that you know that Christie, like you said, is willing to admit that. But I mean, it's a broken system.
And he was supporting perpetuating it is my real problem with it. And I
guess in their defense, I don't know what you do about it.
You know, that's a great point. And I think the only thing that's available is what we have created is a system where there's no recourse against, again, by and large, trying to use their words, you know, the liars and the cheaters and the stealers. The thieves, right? Well, that's the essence of basically this show, what we talk about, the idea of justice. Why would people support a system in which there's no recourse against those guys? If you put your money in a private bank and it's, I don't know, stolen, it's misplaced, it's whatever, you have recourse against them. But again, when it comes to the state, people see that as a safety net, and for some reason, I don't know if their eyes off the ball there or they just want to forgive the state or whatever. You really want a system where you have no recourse if you get screwed over? To me, that's the essence of the problem. And that obviously they're not going to bring that up because they want to be the leaders of that state, right? They want to be the chief of that big system. They're not going to say, well, the system is really the problem. Then, you know, someone could turn around easily and say, well, why would you want to be a part of that organization if you think the organization itself is the problem? So they can't go there politically either.
But do you not think that ideologically or otherwise they believe that they can make it better?
Oh, yeah. I think you're quite correct there. I mean, or, you know, a good question, I guess, maybe. And I do think they think that. And I don't think they really think about the issue to the extent that we're talking about it here tonight. Because for them, they have different motivations, right? It's about ego. It's about conquest. It's about gaining authority. It's about being the number one guy.
Well, it could be about trying to make things better. I mean, it seems to me like in both these guys in this situation are trying to answer a no-win scenario.
Given the system, it's a no-win.
Exactly.
But again, there is a way to do this without that. And again, have a system that doesn't say, hey, there's no recourse. We're not going to have a system where there's no recourse against certain people. Everybody's going to be responsible for what they do or for what they don't do, which may be an obligation, right?
Right.
Instead, I don't think they realize, and maybe they do. I mean, again, I can't know what's in their head or in their minds, but I think they just haven't really even gone there. And I do think what you asked is they really do want to make it better. Why? Because they haven't really considered, you know, certainly out of the mainstream alternatives, only mainstream alternatives, and I do think partly they're locked into that because they're in this popularity contest. You know, anything that's not popular, well, don't put it in your campaign in any way, shape, or form because that's not going to help you get to where you want to be. So I just thought that was an interesting flap.
But there's no alternative. And I think that's the point I'm trying to make, that I'm feeding to you is that there is an alternative, and you believe that there's an alternative.
Yes, there certainly is an alternative, but politically there is no alternative, right?
Right.
And that's, I think, where they're trapped in that paradigm. And that's why they don't see it as an alternative. Anyone who's a power broker, anyone who's an elite, anyone who's connected to these guys, if that system were to go away, they have a lot to lose. So they don't have the incentive to dismantle the system. Again, you don't run to be I don't even know what you call them, the head of the mafia by saying, what I'm going to do if I get there is I'm going to dismantle the mafia.
And to that point, I would say the same thing about Trump as I did about Mitt Romney 4 years ago. Why is a guy like that, that's had so much success,
Yep.
and you can argue about who had the most success,
Right.
one or the other in your eyes, why does he want that job?
Yeah. And again, I'm not saying I have the answer. Just my off-the-cuff thing is they seek the authority, the power, the limelight, right? That's got to be in there, in some of the top priorities of theirs. And again, I'm only guessing. I can't tell you what's in their heart and what's in their minds. But it seems to me anyone who would want to be in charge of the mafia wants to be in charge. Again, it would seem ironic to say, no, I want to be in charge to make it go away. So I just thought enough that, and I did, and again, Brad won't be able to hear this, but I have a clip from the clash between Chris Christie and Rand Paul over bulk data collection and that kind of stuff. This is going to last, if I remember right, it's about 3:34. But I just thought this would be interesting for people to hear in case they didn't see the debate, and I think a number of our listeners wouldn't be listening to this debate anyway, so this will be the first time they hear it. So, yes, I'm right. It's 3:35. So I'll break in, Brad, when it's ready to go, about 3.5 minutes. So here we go. This is a question directed at Chris Christie, and then they're talking about Rand Paul. He gets to rebut, and then it gets into a little back and forth. Here we go, 3.5 minutes.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to switch topics now and talk a bit about terror and national security. Governor Christie, you have said that Senator Paul's opposition to the NSA's collection of phone records has made the United States weaker and more vulnerable, even going so far as to say that he should be called before Congress to answer for it if we should be hit by another terrorist attack. Do you really believe you can assign blame to Senator Paul just for opposing the bulk collection of people's phone records in the event of a terrorist attack?
Yes, I do. And I'll tell you why. Because I'm the only person on this stage who's actually filed applications under the Patriot Act, who have gone before the federal, the Foreign Intelligence Service Court, who has prosecuted and investigated and jailed terrorists in this country after September 11th. I was appointed U.S. Attorney by President Bush on September 10th, 2001, and the world changed enormously the next day. And it happened in my state. This is not theoretical to me. I went to the funerals. We lost friends of ours in the Trade Center that day. My own wife was 2 blocks from the Trade Center that day at her office, having gone through it that morning. When you actually have to be responsible for doing this, you can do it, and we did it for 7 years in my office, respecting civil liberties and protecting the homeland. And I will make no apologies ever for protecting the lives and the safety of the American people. We have to give more tools to our folks to be able to do that, not fewer, and then trust those people and oversee them to do it the right way. As president, that is exactly what I'll do.
Megan, may I respond? May I respond?
Go ahead, sir.
I want to collect more records from terrorists, but less records from innocent Americans. The Fourth Amendment was what we fought the revolution over. John Adams said it was the spark that led to our war for independence. And I'm proud of standing for the Bill of Rights, and I will continue to stand for the Bill of Rights.
And Megan, that's a completely ridiculous answer. I want to collect more records from terrorists, but less records from other people. How are you supposed to know, Megan?
Use the Fourth
What are you supposed to?
Amendment.
How are you supposed
Use
to?
the Fourth
No, I'll tell you how you
Get a warrant.
Let me tell you something.
Get
you
a
don't,
judge to sign the
when
warrant.
Senator.
Go ahead, wait, Governor Christie, make your point.
Listen, Senator, when you're sitting in a subcommittee just blowing hot air about this, you can say things like that. When you're responsible for protecting the lives of the American people, then what you need to do is to make sure that you use the system the way it's supposed to work.
Here's the problem, Governor. You fundamentally misunderstand the Bill of Rights. Every time you did a case, you got a warrant from a judge. I'm talking about searches without warrants, indiscriminately of all Americans' records, and that's what I thought to end. I don't trust President Obama with our records. I know you gave him a big hug, and if you want to give him a big hug again, go right ahead.
And you know, Senator Paul, the hugs that I remember are the hugs that I gave to the families who lost their people on September 11th. Those are the hugs I remember, and those had nothing to do with politics. Unlike what you're doing by cutting speeches on the floor of the Senate, then putting them on the internet within a half an hour to raise money for your campaign, and while still putting our country at risk.
All right, we're cut it up there. We have plenty more.
Okay, so the accusation there is that, Rand Paul, he was one of the opposers of the Patriot Act, or the re-upping of the Patriot Act, right? I didn't even remember now. Is it now called the Freedom Act or something?
I think so.
And so it was actually a very good exchange. The bottom line is, Christie was saying, hey, here's the deal. We have to protect the American public, and if we have to have bulk data, we have to have bulk data. Well, then Rand Paul comes back. Again, Brad, you didn't get to hear this. This is why I'm recapping this a little bit. He says, well, hey, what about the Fourth Amendment, the Bill of Rights, right? And he says, get a warrant. I want to collect less data from the, basically innocent Americans and more data from terrorists. And then, of course, Christie comes back and he says, well, how are you going to do that? If you don't listen in on everybody, you're not going to be able to find out who the terrorists are. And that's, again, where Paul says, hey, get a warrant. That's how you do it legally. And of course, it's really a jab at Christie because he was a prosecutor, a federal prosecutor for a number of years, appointed on the day before 9/11. And I think that was, he says, Chris Christie comes back and says, well, you can blow that kind of smoke about saying, hey, the Fourth Amendment, the Bill of Rights, when you're sitting in the Senate, and it's all theoretical crap, but you really have to protect people. Well, then Rand Paul got back at him and said, hey, you gave Obama a big hug. I don't trust him with our records. Go ahead if you want to give him another big hug. And then it kind of went downhill from there. But I think a lot of people see is that, hey, as a practical matter, you have to collect all this bulk data so that you can find the bad guys. And I think if you support that, I think you fundamentally misunderstand what the United States was founded on. Again, I'm not arguing the political philosophy of freedom here. I'm just saying in this context of this debate, right, it's the Constitution that's the basis. Well, the whole purpose, and Rand Paul did point out, he said, hey, by and large, that's what we fought the Revolutionary War over, right? And now you're saying we have to throw that all out the window. And again, some politicians are happy to say, yep, we have to throw it all out the window because, the world has changed, they can say, and all this stuff. And it works, is what I'm saying politically. Again, I think the job to provide security is a very difficult one, but I think it's made more difficult by an agency, an organization, again, that you have no recourse against. Why support an agency that if they do something wrong, you basically can do nothing to them? And again, I've had the argument against me in the case of, say, the police department does something wrong, and they say, yeah, you have recourse, you can sue them, and some people have won. I get that. But the police department, in fact, doesn't pay because it can't pay, right? They just raise taxes and they take more money from people who had nothing to do with it. So there is, in fact, no recourse against these guys. And that's, the part I don't understand, why people continually support organizations of which there's no recourse against their activity. And I think that was a good display of it. Anyway, your thoughts, Brad, on that?
Well, I think that the public believes that there is recourse. I think the public believes that, hey, if these guys make a mistake, they're going to get caught. But then what happens? Nothing happens. Or it gets smeared under the rug and they get off for a lighter offense.
Yes, much lighter.
Because everybody's on the same team.
Right. And they don't see, I think that in part, I agree with you. I think that's how a lot of people view this. I'm not arguing that. But again, the fundamental message is that they miss, I think, is human nature, right? Don't humans tend to do what they see as in their best interest? Now, you may observe me and say, Tom, what you did there wasn't in your best interest. Of course, I make mistakes, right? But at the moment, whenever I do make a decision or take an action or whatever, I do attempt to do it in whatever's in my best interest. And you say that's not correct. People just give out of their own goodness. Yes, but they do that because they want to. Again, I would argue that's their best interest. You sometimes help people because it makes you feel good, right? Because you want to. Again, it's because of what you want. And you have to understand human nature is my point as to why these people do what they do. And again, to think that they are on a team, I think is naive. That's just me. That's not a political philosophy of freedom thing. That's just my view. You have to understand, I think people want what they think is best for them, and they'll do that first. And maybe to exacerbate that whole thing is it the right thing to do to kill innocent people with drones as long as they're brown people? I would argue that's a clear message of, well, that's not because they're on the same team or anything. That's clearly a mistake. And it's people say, well, there are casualties of war. Well, it's easy for me to make the decision that someone else will be the casualty of war. Right? That's not, doing anything good for the United States. That's doing what they think is going to be good for them. It's better for them to show that we got this bad guy, but you don't mention that you killed 20 innocent people in the process. So I think a lot of that is, again, naive and misguided what people think about it. So anyway, I did think that was a really good exchange. If anybody has, serious interest in it, check it out. You can find it on YouTube. I think that was actually at Fox News, something like that. Let's see, where am I? Okay, that bulk data collection. I want to move along here. And, Governor John Kasich, the Ohio governor, he laid out a case for compassionate conservatism. I think this is the last one I have yet, and then we'll move on to Cecil the Lion here in a second. Ohio Governor John Kasich, he laid out a case for compassionate conservatism that would help drug addicts, the working poor, and the disabled, as well as keep the mentally ill out of prison. And his quote, if I have this right, again, please critique me, the Lord wants our hearts to reach out to those that don't have what we have. I mean, that shouldn't be hard for America. That's who we are, he said. Here's the problem is, first of all, what if you have a different interpretation of what the Lord wants? How does a guy have basically a monopoly on his understanding of what the Lord wants? Right? So there's a potential problem there. And in that problem, right, how is Governor Kasich, who would be President Kasich, how is he going to get the resources to do what he claims the Lord wants? Right? You have to do it through taxation, or you have to do it through inflating the money supply, growing the money supply, which is devaluing the money that Brad and Tom and others have, which I call that stealing, right? Or fraud, or however you want to describe it. Or you have to take a loan, which, again, either of those two processes, inflation or higher income tax, has to be used to repay it, which I would argue, again, is still either fraud or stealing or both. So in order to do the Lord's work, apparently, you have to steal from people or commit fraud. And I don't know the Lord. I mean, I didn't meet him. I haven't talked to him. I don't know the deal. But I'm going to guess he had a commandment, thou shalt not steal, I believe was what it was. And I don't remember there being any exceptions after that, like thou shalt not steal unless you're helping mentally ill people out of the hospital and paying a bunch of bureaucrats to administer a program in order to do that. I didn't see that stuff, and I didn't read all the fine print in the Bible, so maybe it's in there, and I'm unaware. So that's my first thing. But again, on this show many times I've said, well, religion lacks a universal ethic. That's the problem with relying on any of the religions to say that's what our system of justice should do. In other words, what if I happen to be, I don't know, a Buddhist, and you happen to be a Catholic, and your religion tells you one thing, and my religion tells me another thing. What are we going to do now? Again, you can insist that your religion is the true religion in the right way, but I got a feeling the Buddhist guy is going to say the same thing. And again, there's no resolution to that. So I think you have to rely on a universal ethic to determine your system of justice or determine what justice actually is, right? And my universal ethic would be nature, right? I think nature happens to be common to all of us. So I think there's a much sounder basis of which to make this argument from, you can argue, natural rights, right, or the nature of man makes more sense than from on a religious basis. And so I think that to me was a bit comical, right? And I know it sounds good. It's compassionate, as he described it, his compassionate conservatism. I think that may have worked for him politically. Again, I can't really analyze that too well. I'm just a dopey guy from Wisconsin. I don't know these things, but I just thought that was interesting. And then, to take the thought, again, of, the income tax, which I believe is coercion, which ultimately is theft, is to take money from one guy to supply it to another. Again, taking means without your consent, right? Isn't that, basically a derivative definition of slavery, right? For one guy to be forced to support another guy, right? I have to submit and surrender the fruits of my labor to support another. Well, that's the definition of slavery. So what I'm saying is he's basically arguing for more slavery. And I know most people don't get that. And that's what you get when you listen to this show. You get to hear that. But I think it's interesting. If you really think about what these guys are saying, my point is it's an incoherent message. And it has to be, because they don't support justice. They actually don't support freedom. They don't support property rights. That's the problem with their message. And again, I'm not doing that from a political perspective. They may be saying politically what works out good for them. But I think ultimately they're going to have to deal with problems because they're creating them if they actually follow through on their message. Just on a side, conservatives have criticized Kasich for taking federal money for the expansion of Medicaid in Ohio under Obama's signature health care law. And Kasich said he learned about business, by the way, as an executive at Lehman Brothers. The bank collapsed, by the way, when he worked there in 2008. Helping trigger the global financial crisis and recession that followed, etc. And again, I'm not saying he's responsible for it. Just pointing out he was working at one of the big banks when the whole thing went down. Draw the conclusions that you will, or maybe there aren't any to draw. But I just thought that was noteworthy there. And he's also seen as the architect, I think, of the last balanced budget federally, because he worked on the finance committee or something, budget committee. And he touts that as one of his greatest accomplishments. So with that, I was going to leave that unless there's something else you wanted to talk about the GOP debate in any aspect, Brad.
No, just broadly.
Yep.
It's I find it to be interesting how so many people, I guess not a lot that I associate with, but I think that the media storm over it. And I think that the people that are really pulling for their guy take this so seriously.
Absolutely. You know, to me, the general flavor of this whole thing,
or guy or gal, sorry,
right, guy or gal. By the way, we probably should mention Fiorina's, was shot up in the polls. Apparently, she had a really good showing in the, what do they call it, the early debate, or the happy hour debate, the one that happened a little before, where there was like 7 candidates there. Apparently, she was the star of that. I did not watch that, so I can't really comment on it other than knowing that apparently she got a good bump in the polls.
Well, and I guess to that point, I found the whole basis of excluding her rather skeptical. That it's like, well, wait a minute. Should this not be a forum for everyone?
Yeah, and they're saying they couldn't handle 17 people. Now, who am I to say they can't? But interesting...
Well, they didn't handle 12 or whatever number it was. So,
one of the interesting, I saw or heard the statistic that the 3 so-called moderators actually had more speaking time than anyone else than the other. Well, it would be the 10 that were in that debate. So I just find it interesting. And again, debate, I would use that term very loosely. I don't even think it was a debate, because the debate is, basically, they ask me a question, I answer it. They ask you the same question. What's the differences between you? And we say, well, Brad screwed up because of this. Right? I make my case that I have a better argument that Brad has, and vice versa. Well, they weren't doing that. They were asking basically everybody a different question, and not saying contrast yourself on this item with your competitor.
It's almost prompting.
Yeah, it was just. It was bad. Again, this ties. I want us just to wrap this whole thing up. To me, again, the title of the show today is Bombs, Babies, and Cecil. And I think the overwhelming flavor of this whole thing is their support for the military-industrial complex. And again, I don't have the statistics for you, but it seemed like virtually every one of these guys said we have to have a stronger military. We need to invest more in bombs and killing and warfare. That's how we project our strength, basically, as they're saying. And then there was a big deal, or a significant amount of time was taken about the abortion issue. So, again, that's the bombs and babies part. So they all basically put themselves forward as what is interpreted as today as modern is pro-life. So we did the bombs, we did the babies, and now we're going to do Cecil. So we're going to move on to something much more serious, Brad.
All right.
Do you want to explain, if anybody happens to be living in a refrigerator box or something and is not aware of the Cecil the Lion story?
Sure, I'll throw it out. What was it, about a week ago? Maybe more,
right. Probably
more at this point.
I think so.
The news broke that I don't even know what Cecil was a lion, a male lion, but I don't know what made Cecil so popular. I don't know what...
It was the black mane.
Was it?
Yeah, he had unusually, he had a black mane.
Okay, so a fairly famous lion that had some notoriety the news broke that he had been shot by a 4-fee hunter, and that there was great suspicion about the circumstances of that killing.
Yes.
That he was potentially lured off of the preserve that he was on, that this happens to be, over here in Minneapolis, happens to be a local dentist that's a well-known big game hunter, allegedly paid in the vicinity of $55,000 to shoot a lion. I don't know if it was specifically for him. You might be able to correct me on that, but certainly to shoot a lion, a male lion, and the world went on its ear as far as how could this happen, and we shouldn't have this happen, and obviously the typical. I'm just going to go ahead and say it this way. It's not the right way to say it, but the overreaction, the incredible taking a stand about this killing.
Right. I think you did a good job there. I think people know basically the story. I think it's very interesting. Before I get into this really more specifically into the Cecil thing, I just had a couple questions, and this is something we've actually touched on the show before. Why are lions, I'll just say apparently, because I'm not the guy who stands out there and counts them, why are they scarce? Right? Just think about that for a second. Why is it that lions are scarce? Contrast that, why are cattle apparently abundant? I mean, I don't hear too many stories about, oh my goodness, I think cattle are going extinct. We're going to be in trouble, right? And my question beyond that is the difference essentially market forces? In other words, cattle are commonly, not always, but commonly held in private, right? And lions are held in the public domain, right? I don't know, governments or the public, quote unquote, owns them. And I'm not saying that's the only difference, but I'm just saying I just would like it to raise maybe a question in somebody's mind. Hey, that's kind of interesting. Why? I wonder what the effect is. And again, I would say if you own a herd of cattle, say, you probably have the incentive to keep the herd going. If you lose your herd, I assume as a rancher, you're out of business, right? Well, when no one owns the lion, as in no one owns basically the fish in the sea, the whales, right? If there's a commercial value to these things, the incentive is to take as many as you possibly can. Because what's the difference? If I don't take it, somebody else might take it. And also, even if somebody else won't take it, well, why, if I'm out here, why not take 2 or 3 or 4 instead of 1? Right? Essentially, my overhead is largely the same, but I might as well take as many as I can. Because there's no cost per animal, essentially. And I think that's another thing. I think it's the way they're owned is very important. That has something to do with it, to be sure, right? And then,
and I think that if I can interject,
yep.
That point is something that probably few people have considered.
Yes.
That these are on public refuges. I'm sure that there are some in private.
Sure.
But I believe this one was a public reserve.
Yes, I believe it was too.
And therefore it is managed by the government.
Mm-hmm. The Park Service, whatever they call it.
Right. And the government probably benefits from it. It controls it. It benefits from it in the form of, well, you'd go, well, wait a minute, no, this is for the people, for the world to see. This is a
national treasure.
It's a treasure, exactly. And I don't disagree that they, I'd like to see animals in the wild.
Sure.
But I think that the fact that they are publicly owned, if you will, at least the ground that they're on, therefore they are publicly owned, is something for people to consider.
Yes. I think it's good. At the time, I remember the flap about Cecil there was the flap about the Planned Parenthood thing, right? And part of it was, well, how come there's more flap about the Cecil than there are of the unborn, right? And that whole deal. And just for sake of controversy, I'll leave that for a second. But my deal is, what about the outrage in the proportionality, the lion versus innocents killed by drones? Right, and I know that was a big part of the hubbub, the proportionality of it. But I just think there was an issue there. And again, I'm not. Hey, if this lion should have been protected, it should have been better protected. There's some suspicion that the hunter actually did absolutely nothing wrong. That he claims he had the necessary permits and he relied on the local hunting guide. But, I saw in his he's not home. He's vacated because of threats against him. I saw there was a picture, I don't know if it's accurate, but there was on the local news here in Minneapolis showing somebody had spray painted on his garage door, lion killer, and apparently he feared for his safety, so apparently he's not around at the moment. But I just thought,
as with his practice, because
yes.
He's a dentist.
I believe it's closed.
Yes.
So, there's something. But one of the angles I wanted to talk about tonight was a different one, a slightly different one. Did you hear this, Brad? This was interesting to me. and I may not have the order of the big three airlines. I don't know which one did it first and which one did it last. I thought it was Delta who did it last of the big three, but again, I may stand corrected here. That all three airlines have now announced that they won't transport such, I don't know, kills. Now, how they categorize them or define them, that I didn't look into the details. But the deal was obviously in outrage to Cecil being killed. They said, they wouldn't transport it. And that in and of itself is not interesting to me per se. But the idea that people always say that, hey, businesses only do what they do in order to protect their revenue or to gain revenue. And I'm also, let me say, I'm not saying in this case they didn't do that in this case. Again, I don't know what their thoughts were. So maybe, in fact, they thought, hey, if we don't do this, we may lose business. Especially the second and or the third of the big three, right? Once one guy announces, you go, crap, we're going to have to do this as well. Otherwise, we may lose some business. People who feel strongly about this won't fly our airline for all.
We're going to look like big heartless dudes.
Right. Maybe that was the thing. Again, I'm not saying that was the reason. But my real point here is the idea of social pressure, right? And that's, again, what I ultimately believe holds this whole system that we have today in place. It's, in fact, social pressure. And I do not deny the fact that I believe that the police are completely out of hand. They're militarized. Right? There isn't the presentation of justice to the vast majority of people in their everyday lives. But the point is, there's a lot more of the quote-unquote us's versus the thems. I mean, the guys in the state, right? They can't physically impose this on everyone, right? They can't actually force every single citizen, if you will, of the United States. What holds this together is some of the things that I say on this show are politically, socially incorrect, right? But again, I just want to point out that the social pressure is what holds this together. It's not the actual guns of the state. And again, I'm not denying that they have the guns. I'm just saying that's not actually what holds this together. And that's what I found so interesting about the three airlines, is my point. So I don't know if I
think the social pressure went both ways.
Yes.
Was the most dramatic part of this, in that the great upheaval of the reaction to this lion's killing, just, unjust, otherwise, it was top shelf story for more than a week. I think it's still kind of going on, got some legs.
Yes.
But also, your point is very valid that with the airlines, because of that, we always talk about the free market, but this is kind of a knockoff example of what the free market can create.
Exactly.
The reactions that it can create, because airlines are big business and they move a lot of people, and they're responsible to their shareholders. And so just that they would react to that way shows you the power of the free market. And there was no government involvement in saying the airlines needed to do this,
right,
to our knowledge.
Right. To our knowledge, that's correct.
There's no regulatory motive, no regulatory requirement that they do so. They did it for themselves.
Right. Here's an interesting one, too, to the point you had made a little earlier about the economic benefit of having a Cecil or lions, right, and that they're publicly owned, in this case, Zimbabwe. There's a Reuters story. It says it's entitled, "Zimbabwe Lifts Hunting Ban Imposed After Killing of Cecil the Lion." That's a U.S. report. It says, I'll just read it very quickly here for people that may have a little bit of interest. Zimbabwe has lifted a ban on big game hunting outside a national park 10 days after imposing the moratorium following the illegal killing of the country's most prized lion. Again, illegal killing, I don't know if that's been determined yet. I think that's just the accusation. I don't know if that's settled. But anyways, authorities in Zimbabwe imposed an indefinite ban on August 1st on hunting areas surrounding the, I don't know if it's Hwang National Park amid international outrage after a rare black-maned lion called Cecil was lured from the park and killed by an American hunter with a bow and arrow. But again, the story goes on to say that how the tourism industry is big depending on this hunting. And of course, if the government is attempting to bring in more tax dollars, they have the incentive to have the more tourists. And many of the tourists are drawn by this big game hunting. So they did have the incentive to remove this ban. And of course, this probably isn't as big a story as when they imposed the ban. So I think there's some political hay to be made here by these guys to say, well, yeah, we'll put on the ban, we'll make a big hubbub over it, and then when we take it off, no one's really going to notice anyway.
Because we need that. And
yes.
I think something you taught me that was very hard for me, one of my aha moments or one of my struggles, whichever way you want to call it, with liberty was because I'm very, I don't know, I like the outdoors, pro-green, whatever you want to call it. You guys taught me that the government basically licenses or sets the bar as far as what that policy is, or legalizes pollution.
Right.
And in this instance, the government here in Zimbabwe and these other countries that have lions is doing the same thing. It's choosing to do so. But my question to you would be, and I know we need to wrap up,
right?
How would it work in a free society? The government wouldn't have all this public land, and so it'd be under private control, right?
No doubt, and it would. I would assume there'd be a number of ventures like just what comes to the top of my head. That's the limitation is my little brain here. The San Diego Wild Animal Park is an economic venture, right? And if it's in their interest to protect these animals because they have a fair variety of animals there, right, to do so. In other words, if there's actually commercial value to something, they're more apt to be saved, as it were, like in the case of cattle, right? Apparently, and only apparently, it appears to me that a big part of the value of lions is to hunt them. So what I would assume, there's was there elk hunts, and there's many other, javelina, and there's other animals that people enjoy hunting, and that's one way that they would probably be there. At least they'd be maintained, because again, if I had this business where I allow people to come in to hunt, well, of course, I'm not going to allow them to hunt every last one of them. I'm out of business. So I think privately held is again going to be the way to do this, whether it's hunting or for viewing, observing, for studying, those kind of things. That may be the future of the lion. I mean, I don't know what it is, unless there's some other value, that I'm unaware of. And again, I haven't spent a whole lot of time to learn this, but it appears to me that those are the main values of a lion, and maybe ultimately that's fate. That's the fate of the lion. The other thing is we don't know what the fate of the lion would have been had there been absolutely no interference by man. I mean, it's not... I don't think it's likely, but it's quite possible that they may be extinct already for whatever reason. A disease wipes them out that came, I don't know, from some insect or something. I mean, it's happened throughout history. So who's to say that the lion would certainly be here? Again, maybe it seems likely they would, but, it's possible they wouldn't. So, everybody tends to right away blame man for these things. Maybe the lions have survived as long as they have is because I assume they ate people to some degree along the way. And I don't know, maybe that helped them last as long as they did. There's a ton of possible explanations, and it's all conjecture in my view. So who's to say, again, what the fate of the lion is? And I think to preserve the lion, the best means of doing so is through the free market. That's what's going to do it. Again, if you say, well, I'm relying on the governments, the national parks, these organizations to do so, well, apparently they're not doing so good, right? I read somewhere that I don't know what it was, 10 or 20 years ago, there was like 450,000 lions. Today there's only 30,000. So how are these public entities doing preserving them? I'm saying they're failing miserably.
Or they're allowing them to be overhunted.
Right.
which is still failing miserably.
Exactly. That's the point. Either way, they're failing miserably. They're not able to protect them, or they're not able to preserve them otherwise.
So the only thing that would potentially affect the downward trend is for the public to begin to value them more to be seen alive than to be shot
Exactly.
and hung on your wall.
Yeah, and who am I to say what the proper way is? I don't, who am I to tell people which way is the better way? I mean, the marketplace, society should ultimately decide that, not Tom. I'm not King Tom. So, okay. I just wanted to comment before we close out here. Tanya said this is a very good comment, I thought. When we were talking about, religions and property rights and all this stuff, again, because I said religion, we were talking about John Kasich and that religion wasn't a universal ethic and blah, blah, and I said natural rights is the way to go, essentially. And she made a great comment. I just wanted to put that up here. She says, respect for property rights allows all religions to peacefully coexist, even if they agree on nothing else. And again, that's one of the ultimate points of the show here is that if there is, in fact, support for property rights, the free market exists for religions, right? Join any religion you want. Join no religion if that's your bag, right? I think that's really the point. The basis is property rights. It's not something that's not universal. That's what, as they say, makes the world go round. So I thought that was a great topic, and and she also, before that, has, of course, a little bit of humor. She says, sure, the Lord wants you to steal stuff and give it to poor people. She says, ugh. So, anyway, it's interesting how some people look at this, and obviously Tanya understands this well and has an interesting perspective. That's why I prefer to share her comments. So with that, I guess we should go out here. And I had just kind of the closing, my concluding comments here, a couple things. The closing quote of the day, I thought, whenever I assume that the welfare of others is my problem, I am, per force, saying that their welfare is not their problem. I am denying to them self-responsibility, the most precious of human possessions. That's from Leonard Reed. I think that was a great quote. And again, I just made one of my concluding points here is, hey, I did have said again on the show many times that I'm not interested in politics. And, of course, I still am not. And maybe some people can point me out as a hypocrite because I watched a debate and I paid attention to it. But, again, I did it for entertainment purposes, and I was not disappointed. Again, some would argue that, in fact, there was no substance to the debate. I would argue that, that this is, in fact, was not a debate, as we talked about earlier, so that kind of throws that argument away. And the substance presented was predictably statist, right? Bombs, babies, and hyperbole. That's really what they said. They didn't say anything specific. They didn't say that, hey, I support freedom, I don't, and I would argue they're all statists, so they're not going to. Rand Paul's probably the one who comes closest to doing so. I think he's a bit of away from that. And is he trying to do what's politically expedient to get him there? At least so far, I'm saying, for the information I see, it's not working. He's not getting there. So the bottom line for me is the upholding of property rights rooted in self-ownership is the only just society. Until this is presented, nothing substance will improve. So I think that's the difficulty here is. I think the quote I left you there is actually an old one for your close, Brad. So if you want to skip that, and we'll just close out the show from here, unless you had anything else you wanted to add before we do that.
I don't. Enjoy the conversation. Sorry I was late. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Tell your friends, and as we always say, heck, even tell your enemies about the show. Our next show will be on Tuesday, August 18th at 7 p.m. Right, Tom? Are we going to do that?
Yeah, we got to chat about that because I'm going to be traveling again, but we'll figure it out.
So I sent Tom a video over the weekend that he may or may not have liked, but
I did watch it.
I thought the guy was pretty interesting about several things, and the main thing is that we hope with this show that we provoke you to think. We hope that provoke you somehow to think about what you do believe, question it, galvanize it, or reconsider it. One way or the other, that's our goal.
Yep.
Make your comments known on our Facebook page. Check out the Liberty Rules Radio over on blogtalkradio.com. They have a liberty-oriented show that is quite entertaining, and they're good friends of ours.
Absolutely.
We also listen to Paul on the Political Paradox podcast, which is politicalparadox.ca.
Yep.
And thanks for listening, everybody. Look forward to our next discussion. Until next time, this has been the Annoying Peasant Radio Show. Thanks, Tom. Sign us off.
We will see everybody. Thanks for listening. This is Mac DeMarco. Goodbye weekend. Good night, everybody.